once again, thank you all for joining today. This is the supporters meeting for Policy and Taxation Group and the members meeting for Family Enterprise USA. As you've just noted, we are recording this call. If you have a question, please put it in the chat or the Q&A. We'll attempt to monitor that as we go along as best we can. For those of you who are currently not supporting our work at Policy and Taxation Group or Family Enterprise USA, of course, we really encourage you to do so. And you can go on either website and you can do that online, policyandtaxationgroup.com, familyenterpriseusa.com. Quickly, I'm going to go through the agenda. We have a pretty full agenda today. As everyone sees, Frank Luntz is on the call. He's going to talk about the war on the wealthy in the Biden era. And we have some really, really interesting new survey work that we've done that he's going to talk about on this call. We're fortunate to have James Williams on the call, who is legislative assistant for Senator Thune. And he's going to talk about Senate Republicans' view on estate tax policy. And then Catherine Manger, who is the senior policy director for Speaker Pelosi, will be joining us later. And Russ is going to interview her and discuss questions around the Democrat leadership's position on various tax policies. Russ will talk about other tax policies, and then Brandon Ramon will talk about estate tax policies possibilities. So I'm going to turn it over to Frank in the interest of time. And Frank, if you'll share with us some of that information on the survey in which we talked about or tried to learn what's fair share, what do the voters think about elimination of step-up tax policy in general, and the government and the country. And I mean, I know you have lots of slides, so share the ones that you would like to share.
Hopefully you can see it now.
Yes.
I'm going to walk through, and Pat, I'm going to take this as long as you'll allow me to give it out as much information as I can in a very short time. It was fascinating to me how much America has changed. We are not the same country that we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The days of Reagan Bush and low tax and limited government are gone, and I think they're gone for a long, long time, maybe for a generation or perhaps longer. And they've been replaced by a desire for a safety net and a willingness to raise taxes, particularly those on the wealthy. And I'm not going to use, because we have Democrats who'll be joining this call, I don't want to gin everybody up right now, but I do want to show you just how hostile the public has become and how difficult the challenge for you is going to be. First, that the opposition to capital gains increases, wealth taxes, estate taxes. What we find is that that the American people actually do not want higher taxes, with the exception of those on the wealthy. And it makes you all, and what I've written in here is that you've got a bullseye on your back, and it's up to you to remove that. Second is that the public does think that they're overtaxed. Most Americans do believe that, but there is no sympathy for what the wealthy are paying. The feeling is that the wealthy do not pay their fair share. We're going to get into that in a moment. And we have to find a language. And here's the beginning of it. First, generationally owned family businesses built on hard work. I know that's a lot of words, but that is absolutely necessary in your communication. Being a small business owner, a medium business owner, being a family business is not enough. Generationally owned communicates that there is this level of stability in there, and Democrats like that. Built on hard work communicates the effort that went into amassing that savings, and that's what Republicans like. And the idea that this is, it's no longer a war on success, it's actually a war on savings. I'm going to show you those numbers in a moment. Second, Americans don't believe we get what we pay for, and this is a challenge, and it's going to be one that I need to get you on board with. You're going to fight with me that you want to focus on generation skipping, you want to focus on cap gains, and I'm going to tell you, stop. You are not going to win that battle. The only battle you can win, and you can definitely win it, is the idea that we don't get what we're paying for. And until Washington gets its act together until Washington can prove that it can spend more efficiently, more effectively, and more accountably. Until it does that, then not another dime is a much stronger argument for you than anything else you've got on tax policy. I'm actually going to tell you to shift the debate, and you're going to tell me no, and I'm going to tell you you don't have a choice. If this becomes an issue about what you pay, even the Republicans, even conservative Republicans, think that the wealthy don't pay their fair share. Pat, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Republicans are hostile right now. By the way, Republicans are hostile, so you can only imagine what the Democrats are. And that's
So,
why
Frank, I think it's important that people know just how important this is that 70% of the taxes are paid by a top 10% of Americans, but they don't care. To your point, voters don't care and legislators don't care. So we've got to just forget that, is what you're telling us.
Exactly. That is exactly the point. And so we need to shift the battle to the fact that they're going to raise taxes and they're going to waste your savings, not your assets, not your estate. They're going to waste what you've spent a generation saving. That's the powerful part of it. You spend your money wisely, government wastes your money. And one more set here. If tax fairness is going to be the language of the left, tax accountability is the language on the right. But in the end, it's a lifetime of savings is what you're trying to protect and what the American people will protect. So we have begun to develop a brand new lexicon. I've been working on this with Pat for almost 30 years. And the truth is there are more changes to the language in this survey than anything that I've done in a long, long time. And it has to be, because the hostility is so great. And the last point here, and I'm going to show you data, and then we'll take a couple questions. 1/4 of Americans, even more, now believe that America is a failed country. This drives me insane. It's the reason why I'm in Warsaw right now. It's the reason why I left the States 2.5 months ago. I've not been back to the US. I don't want to come back. This is not the country that I remember. This is not the land of hope and opportunity. This is the land of revenge. This is the land of ugliness. We are no longer trying to grow the pie. We're simply fighting over what pie still exists. And this is not the America that I grew up in or the America I want to be about. And I'm urging you. In fact, I'm not urging you. I'm almost demanding you. And I apologize for sounding rude, but you don't have a choice here. If you haven't noticed, cancel culture and white privilege and wokeism is coming to this country, coming to America, and it is growing and it is expanding. And if you stay silent, if you stay quiet, eventually they will come after you. I sound like I'm crazy. I'm not an ideologue. Anyone who knows me knows I'm actually moving away from some of the conservative points of view that I had 10 years ago, as recently as 5 years ago. But I'm apoplectic about where America is right now and the fact that the people on this call, I don't think, get it. The enemies that you have, the people who want to confiscate what you have worked so hard to create. This is a different country right now. I'm going to show you some of the data behind it. So I just want you to know, you can take a quick look at this. This is virtually all of it is brand new language. So for example, a reward for a life well lived rather than punished at death. You're doing the positive, not the negative. Or our first responsibility is to protect economic freedom. It's not economic growth. That's an academic term. That's an MIT term. Eliminating lobbyist loopholes and special interest deals. You have to get them to focus on the corporations rather than the individuals, or you're going to have a problem. It's wrong for the government to tax someone literally for dying. That phrase we developed about 10, maybe a dozen years ago, and that still works. We've got an entire lexicon for you. And not only that, we're now telling you what not to say. For example, the free market doesn't work anymore. The free market is not free to people. They don't understand it. They've not been taught it in school, and now they don't appreciate it. So you're trying to create a healthy economy. Rather than a business with 50 million in revenue, it's a generationally owned family business built on hard work. We're not trying to simplify the tax code. We're trying to make it more fair and more accountable. Instead of too many tax brackets, it's tax dollars wasted by Washington. Another example, a couple more examples. It's not a lifetime of success. Pat, we talked about a war on success. I don't believe that anymore. It actually has to be that we are punishing savings rather than punishing success. It's a lifetime of savings rather than a lifetime of success. So we've got all these words for you. I'll stop for 1 second and I'll take one question, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of data, if you'll allow me.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat, Frank, and it's from Fernando. Frank, do you believe our members will be in tune with the new messaging of reducing government spending after all the expenditures from the last couple of years under Republican control? How do we pivot from this argument?
We don't have a choice. Donald Trump was willing to spend whatever it took to keep himself elected. He was even suggesting spending more than the Democrats at certain points. He was trying to win his election. Our economic future is genuinely at stake right now. We don't have the money. We don't have the revenue. We don't have even though we had a 6.5% economic growth, that will not cover the trillions of dollars in new spending. So they're going to come after someone. They'll come after corporations first, and then they come after you all. I can't figure out how to save you. I can't figure out how to change the focus of the conversation. So I say to every member here, if it is about taxation, you're guaranteed to lose because you're where the money is at. Why did, I guess it was Al Capone, they asked him, why did he rob banks? His answer was, that's where the money was. Well, unfortunately, even if they take everything from you, confiscate everything from you, that's not enough, but they're going to have to come somewhere. So we have to shift that conversation to spending. That was a good question. And if members want to put together a special briefing just on the polling, I'm willing to do it. So I'll make that offer.
Yeah, that's
Let me
good to
show
know,
you
Frank.
some of the numbers. A business that represents the American dream has been part of the lexicon of this organization now for the last 15, 20 years. And only 30% choose it. 62% choose a generationally owned family business built on hard work. There's a better way to communicate it, and that's it. So this is no longer about the American dream. This is no longer about leaving something to your kids. This is about businesses, generationally owned businesses built on hard work. I'll give you another example. The small business owner is still popular, and it's much more popular than the family business, even though small business itself is not nearly as credible today as it was even a year ago. But it's not about entrepreneurs. I will repeat it again. Look at the bottom. It is not about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have no sympathy. They got no support. We know how important they are. But in this issue, they just don't matter. So show you a couple more things. What bothers you most about the current tax code? The number one issue is not taxes. Our hard-earned tax dollars are wasted by Washington. Now, that does great among Republicans. It's the number one choice by 2 to 1. But notice what Democrats choose. Too many lobbyist loopholes and special interest tax breaks. So we're going to find a way to argue that the step up in basis that Biden wants to change is actually a loophole. We got to try to figure out how to do that. And that we're going to simplify the tax code and simplify what people owed at the time of death. You do that and you have strengthened your case. But as you look down that list, you'll see that the differences between Republicans and Democrats is remarkable. This division that we have right now is absolutely huge. What do we want to protect? I'm not about the negative. I'm about the positive. And as important as a nest egg or earned success or life's work, even small business, there's one thing that does incredibly well, and that is a lifetime of savings. Pat, we've never had this before. We've never had this language before. So we got some really good stuff here. And I'm going to push it for one more minute, and then we'll do one more question, and I know you want me off. There are two businesses that I'm so glad we asked this question. I know that there are a lot of people on this call that somehow involve construction or retailing or manufacturing. There are two businesses that matter: farmers and restaurant owners, and nothing else. And so I want to highlight the restaurant owner that actually does something that is a dream, which is not only opening up their own restaurant, but opening up the second and third restaurant, how important that is. And we can't get away from farmers. I know that most of them represent small business. We got to look now at the medium size, but those are the two occupations that really matter to people. The single best line, the best line, death should not be a taxable event. It outperforms that it's a calculated attack on the American dream by more than 2 to 1, 46% to 19%. Or a line that we used to use, the estate tax is the wrong tax at the wrong time and hurts the wrong people, 22%. Again, death should not be a taxable event, 46%. So Pat, we have got a brand new lexicon, a brand new way to shape this. I am absolutely not convinced we will be successful. And I'm absolutely convinced that if you all sit on your hands, this is the strongest I've ever made this statement. They see you, they know how much money you have, they want to take it from you. How much more evidence do you need that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and AOC aren't the minority anymore? They're the majority of the Democrats. And because of the last election, the Democrats aren't in charge. So you better figure it out, because all that needs to happen is Joe Manchin has a heart attack. He's in his 70s, or that Kristen Sinema ends up in the hospital and the Democrats have a majority to do anything they want. We have a new lexicon for you to follow. I hope you follow it. And Pat, I'll take a question or two.
Yeah, so please put the questions in the chat. I think what was so important on this survey, and I haven't got to spend a lot of time with it, but it was a real eye-opener for me that something like multi-generational family business resonated so high, because I would have thought that sounds like an estate. Multi-generational means, just as passing something on from generation to generation, and yet it scores so high. Also, the fact that the wealthy still pay, or the top 10% pay 70%, as I said earlier, the taxes, doesn't matter. And I was always thinking that we should try to educate the voters, but that's nonsense. As you've pointed out, what we need to do is use the right language in trying to communicate and focus more on the saving aspect of it. But we're never going to win the argument around, we pay too much taxes. And this survey has just actually, it's really been it brought it home for me, and it's very, very pointed in terms of that particular statistic.
I give you the numbers behind it. We asked the question, what's most important for Washington to address and fix? All the tax policy questions get 28%, 24%, 21%. How Washington spends and wastes taxpayer money, 45%. It is a big deal. We do the spending, and you're on the side of the American people. You focus on the tax policy, and you're in the tiny, tiny minority.
So Paul Cameron asked, what part of the population was included in the survey, Frank? Do you want to?
Everybody. It was a nationwide survey, 1,000 people, margin of error of 3%, 18 to whatever. These are registered voters. It's a nationwide sample.
And we have the statistics from that. They're all equal Democrats, Republicans, as you said, across the country.
There are more Democrats than Republicans by 5%, which is the national number.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions for Frank?
Wow.
I think I think it's such an eye opener, Frank. So you've got a few more minutes. You want to share some more of the slides with us?
I do. So the question, what if you make a major change to the tax code, what would you change? The number one issue, the number one choice, genuinely fair, so the wealthy and connected have no advantage over everyday ordinary Americans. Again, coming after you. And among Democrats, it's by far the number one answer. The second choice for them is more progressive. So lower and middle income earners are not paying the same percentage of their income in taxes as the wealthiest Americans. And what do Republicans want more than anything else? More accountable by eliminating lobbyist loopholes and special interest deals. Those are the things that matter. Look at the bottom. Prioritizing and protecting small business owners and job creators so that economic opportunity grows for all. Only 23% choose that answer compared to 37% who want the fairness. Now, I'm actually going to go backwards. Which is more important, that Washington changes, that Washington spends too much and wastes too much, or that the wealthy are taxed too little and don't pay their fair share? Wake up, people. Democrats say wealthy are taxed too little by 77 to 23. Don't start fighting with Pelosi's person, but just understand where they are coming from. And look at the Republicans, 81 to 19. Washington spends too much and wastes taxpayer money. Nationwide, 51-49, dead even. This is the best I can get you. The best, if everything else were perfect, you'd have a 51-49 advantage, but obviously it isn't. And that's the challenge. That's the problem. Couple more and then I'll stop again. What's most important? The important role for Washington when it comes to the economy. Notice, making the rich pay their fair share of taxes, the third response, is number one by 6 points among Democrats. They have a target on your back. They don't like you. They don't want you to be on this call. And they even prioritize making the rich pay their fair share even more than maintaining a healthy economy. This is not about priorities. This is about getting even. This is about revenge. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Pat, but look at this slide and understand the challenges you face right now. And if you all aren't willing to poke your head up and be willing to talk about the jobs you've created, the lifetime of savings you've put together, how many communities you've helped, how much money you've donated, how many people are better off today because of you. If you're going to keep your head down, then guess what, y'all? Within this time next year, you're going to remember this, because you're going to be seeing a death tax, an effective death tax that is the highest, that potentially the highest that it's ever been because of the rules that they're changing. So Pat, I am agitated. I'm tired, which is not helping, but I am agitated because I see the numbers here. I see what the Democrats want to do. And there are too many people in this organization that want other people to speak up and don't want to do it themselves. Then you lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Pamela asked, how's the best way to put our heads up other than supporting policy and taxation group? Thank you for that. You can answer that, Frank. I would say meet with your legislators. Please let us help you meet with your legislators. They need to hear from you. And Frank's absolutely right. After 30 years, one of my biggest frustrations, same as his, is our families don't put their head up. I understand their concern, but this is an important time. We can do this in a very, a manner that you're going to feel comfortable, and you have to do it. Otherwise, as Frank says, you're going to really regret what's going to happen. So appreciate that. Frank, Richard Horowitz wants to know, did you say you're in Warsaw?
Yes, I'm in Warsaw, Poland. Again, I wanted to get as far away from the US as possible. And Warsaw is about as far away as one could be.
Yeah.
I've been in the UK. I've been teaching at Oxford University, which is a dream come true for me. I've been invited to teach at Eton in September, so I'm coming back to the UK for a month. I'll be teaching in China, I'll be teaching in Abu Dhabi. I'll be hopefully teaching at the University of Edinburgh. But I'm still doing the American polling. I'm still doing the focus groups. I'm working with the Biden administration on COVID, on getting people vaccinated. Trying to find a compromise on immigration that could work for both sides. So Pat, I'm really trying to be constructive. But on this issue, I believe in what your members are trying to achieve. And I know that they can't do it via silence, that they're going to need your help and we're going to need their help.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Frank. Appreciate it very much. As always, your material and your delivery is always stimulating and thought-provoking. And I'm in 100% agreement with our families, stepping up. And if anyone on this call is willing to tell their stories, we've done this in 3 videos already, Casey Roscoe, Steve Wells, and David Plimpton, please, we can do this in a way that you're going to feel comfortable. We need to do it, and we need to be meeting with legislators. So, Frank, we're going to let you go. Thank you once again for being on the call.
And by the way, I do teach at USC. I teach the USC in DC program. I love it. USC students are great. And if you want to find me a job at a good university in the States, I'm happy to do that too.
All right. Bye, Frank.
Bye-bye.
So I'm very pleased to have James Williams on the call with us today. So James is legislative assistant for Senator Thune. He was very kind to reach out to me when he got that position and see how we could work together. So I really appreciate it. He's also worked with Senator Hatch, and he's been very helpful to us in that position as well. So James, happy to have you on the call today. And I think if you can talk to us a little bit about the Republicans' policy view of their policy around estate tax and other taxes, if you'd like to speak to it.
Sure. Well, thank you, Pat. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm dialing in via my phone from Washington, not Warsaw, but that was really interesting to hear Frank's comments. And I guess just before my few remarks, just of course, kind of noting that these are my comments, thoughts, not Senator Thune's. But I do handle the tax portfolio for Senator Thune. Some of you all may know that he's led on the estate tax, the Death Tax Repeal Act for many years. And I think it's up to 35 co-sponsors. Much appreciation to Pat and to many of the folks probably on this call or video for helping out with that. And so, of course, that's always top of mind for Senator Thune, and I think a lot of the Republican conference and likely some Democrats as well. Step up in basis is obviously a very big issue these days. Just sort of topically and kind of to segue somewhat off of Frank's comments of being active in this space, Senator Thune and the full Republican conference led a letter last week that went to President Biden opposing the step up in basis proposal. And it's rare, at least in my sort of narrow corridor, to see the full Republican conference or any conference speak with one voice on an issue. And so I think that was a welcome measure, and sort of we'll see what comes of that. But that's just one avenue to kind of get the word out there of that at least the Republican Senate conference is fully against it. And I think that there's welcome signs on the House side too. There was a letter earlier this year, I believe it was 13 House Democrats, largely rural communities, to Democrat leadership opposing the step up in basis proposal. So I think that this goes to Frank's comment and Pat's comment of just being very active, and it may seem sort of tedious sometimes to reach out to member offices, talk to staff or certainly members, but I think it does go a long ways. And the step up in basis, there's a lot of ways to present it, and folks on this call that are more articulate than me, but death tax repeal, double death tax, backdoor death tax. There's a whole range, and I don't know what the silver bullet is, but I think making the case and providing real world examples has been helpful. Just from an anecdotal perspective, talking about indeed farms, as Frank mentioned, ranches. I met with a group of restaurant owners yesterday from across the country, that owned one chain, one restaurant in sort of Baltimore, to folks that own 30 in Georgia and elsewhere around the country. And step up in basis obviously has a real dramatic impact on varying levels on the income threshold too. Sorry to monologue, Pat. And one that I do think that resonates well, because that seems to be a big sort of focus here, is just the imaginary middle class line of 400,000 that is being talked a lot about. The step up in basis proposal as drafted would certainly hit folks underneath that line. While the transferor or the decedent owes that tax at the time of death, it being a recognition event, you could have a son or daughter that just doesn't make that close to that amount of money that would inherit that property or that estate, and may indeed have to sell off parts of the ranch to pay the tax, or the farm or the business. And to me, it's very unequivocal that it would definitely hit folks under that 400,000 line. I think it's hard to argue otherwise, with a serious argument. But that is the argument that's going on in the country, in the Senate and the House. And it's really helpful to have folks just talking about this issue. And it can be a little bit hard to message. I think that it was no surprise, or at least to me, this is speculating, but that, the American Families Plan didn't go after the estate tax. One, perhaps because there's so much force behind it, or support behind, measures in Congress on that front. But step up in basis is harder to message, harder to just discuss in sort of a quick connect the dot conversation. But but we still nevertheless have to have that conversation. Members are weighing in, at least in the Senate Republican side. I know others are as well. I'm not taking away from that. And I guess I'm trying to be brief here with my comments. I'm looking at the letter. I just pulled it up. A couple other things that might be helpful. You all likely know this better than I do, but I do think the inflation line, talking about step up in basis, it's nowhere near as important or resonates as much as the generational side, but I think that is an important point to raise. It's been tried before in the 70s, of course, and it's just so complicated. Things could be easier for a variety of reasons to make that more administratively possible these days, but it still would be a huge burden, to say the least. And then finally, I guess just if you haven't looked in the Treasury Green Book proposal, some nice light reading. It goes into a little bit of detail on the protections, because a lot of the administration has relied on saying that family farms and businesses won't be hit by this tax if it's passed on to, their heir, and that could be true unless that heir eventually sells it, and then the tax is deferred over 15 years. And so there's a lot of questions to be answered. And I think that that's why you've had, I don't want to say unanimous, but you've had a lot of the ag community, a lot of the small business community speaking out sort of in one voice against this proposal. What happens if you pass on that ranch and you've got 4 kids and 1 or 2 of them wants to take it over, but not the other 2? How does that tax, who would actually be taxed in that circumstance? If the IRS appraises your property differently than, your appraiser, are you going to be going to court with the IRS? Who takes who to court? And and how much planning does that increase as well? Some of these points were raised yesterday on the Senate floor. Senator Thune talked a bit about it again. And I think that he'll likely continue to bang the drum. South Dakota, big ag state. But as Frank mentioned, also on the business side, I think it hits a lot of folks too. And so anyways, I'm talking very fast. I'm trying to be brief with my comments, but maybe I'll just end there. And Pat, if you have any questions, or happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, James. Appreciate that. And we appreciate Senator Thune's leadership on this. I think it's important, as you just mentioned, that while family farms are very important in this country, and we saw that in the survey that Frank just did, people still believe we're a country of farms, which that isn't the case, actually. There's more manufacturers than there are farmers. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that manufacturers, machinery, construction, auto dealers, they have the same issue that those farmers have, which is that illiquid nature of their assets. And nobody keeps that, liquid money in the bank to pay the estate tax. So we need to remember all of those industries, as you've pointed out. So again, we really appreciate Senator Thune's leadership, the letter that he sent, explaining how devastating elimination of step-up fee was much appreciated by our families, because as family businesses, estate tax is one of their top 3 issues. Income tax is important, and so is capital gains tax. So we want to thank you so much for being on the call today, James, and we look forward to working with you going through the rest of the year and this rest of this session.
Well, you got it, Pat. That was pretty easy.
Well, good. We'll have you back.
All righty. Sounds good. Well, thanks, Pat.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I see we have Catherine Monge on the phone, who's Senior Policy Advisor for Speaker Pelosi. We really appreciate you joining us today, and I'm going to let Russ introduce you. And I believe Russ has I think, too long of a list of questions that he's going to ask you today.
We'll get to some of them. And For those of you joining us today, the 55 of you that are out there, if you got questions for Catherine, start typing them in now. We are honored to have Catherine Manger here today. I want to tell you a little bit about her and why she's one of the most brilliant minds on Capitol Hill and a great tax attorney. She grew up in northern Minnesota, but decided to come east to go to school here in DC and in Boston. She worked at a law firm as a tax attorney, and then she went up to Capitol Hill. She's worked for Ben Cardin, a senator from Maryland, who's on the Finance Committee and formerly was on Ways and Means Committee in the House. And then she got promoted to be Speaker Pelosi's tax counsel, where she's been for, I don't know, 8 years, 9,
At least 7.
a while. So she's been through a lot of the tax bills, a lot of the battles, and she will be front and center this year as Democrats try to push the agenda that they campaigned on. So, Catherine, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Good. We have
Thanks.
lots of family business owners on the line here, and some of their family members or their people, the managers who run the businesses for them. So let's just get into it. First of all, so President Biden and the Democrats in 2000, they ran on a campaign, and tax was a central part of it. It was all about income inequality. And they made pledges. Biden and many of the Democrats said, yes, we're going to increase taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals. And we're gonna hold harmless those who make $400,000 or less. They're not going to see tax increases. We are going to provide some tax cuts to working families. So how did this sort of perception and this commitment kind of emerge among the Democrats? It's been coming for 5 or 8 years, or was it a certain incident or some data that you got from the Joint Tax Committee? Tell us how all this emerged.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I just ask that my comments be treated as off the record. And certainly I'm speaking for myself and not necessarily for the speaker. I think we've seen this coming over several years. Certainly the $400,000 number was agreed upon in 2012 around the fiscal cliff tax cut expiration. But I think the larger comfort with campaigning on increases to taxes comes out of the feeling of inequality, that the economy isn't working for everyone, that people are left out of the economy. You saw it in 2016 with the election of President Trump, but growing on that as our party has really looked at our polling, looked at our values, we think we're on solid ground to talk about how can we invest more in people, invest more in jobs, in infrastructure, and ensure that we are doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And that has led to our tax message. Hopefully that's helpful, but it is really out of this feeling of inequality and that middle-class people can't get ahead under the current rules.
Okay, so all the talk in Washington today is about the infrastructure bill in the Senate, and you all get to deal with that, but it doesn't have a lot of taxes in it. So let's move on to the big bill, which is the reconciliation bill in the fall. How big is it going to be? We hear this $3.5 trillion number in the budget committee, but what are the factors that's going to determine how much the Ways and Means Committee is actually going to have to increase taxes in order to do these tax cuts and the investments that you're talking about?
Well, so the truth of the matter is we haven't made those decisions yet. But one of the things that the chairman's doing to prepare his committee is talking about the excitement of spending. Like, what are we really getting for any future revenue increases? And so talking about the child tax credit that we passed in the American Rescue Plan, incredibly popular across districts, cuts childhood poverty by 50%, but it also goes to middle-class families. They're allowed to budget on it. This has been something that the speaker's been working on since about 1997. So paid leave, really looking at the challenges that were highlighted from COVID around how do we help families maintain their responsibilities at home while also going to work and being productive at work. And so paid leave, strengthening the Affordable Care Act, looking at our climate goals, making sure that we are being responsible stewards of the planet. all of those things fall into Ways and Means jurisdiction. And so while we focused on that, got people excited, we're also teaching members just about the administration's proposals, seeing what's popular, what's not popular, so that we can make better decisions, probably closer to September about what that revenue mix might look like.
Okay, well, talking about that revenue mix, the president's proposals were about half corporation tax increases and half on individuals that have more than $400,000 with income. Do you think that sort of split is going to sort of be maintained throughout the process, or are you hearing from the Democrats that they're leaning toward mostly taxing corporations or mostly wealthy individuals, or does it just depend on the particular proposal?
It seems to depend on the particulars. As certainly anyone who's put together a package knows that, sometimes the number makes people squishy. Sometimes the actual policy makes people squishy. I think we're pretty comfortable raising taxes on people making over 400,000. The caucus seems to be pretty united on 21% corporate rate is not enough, but the nuances are always on how far can you turn that dial. The administration going out and getting an OECD deal put some pressure on the international side of the code. That takes just a lot of time to explain to members and help them understand the choices. And so, if you think about our committee, over half our members were not on the committee in 2017, the last time we did major tax legislation. And so, my view is always you want people to make decisions with their eyes wide open. And we're still in that education phase, and we'll figure it out, as we have to, and probably not too far before we have to put pen to paper. But the general feeling of you can raise this money on wealthy individuals and corporations, and that message works across the ideological spectrum of the caucus is pretty consistent.
All right, let's talk about one of those policies, capital gains and the repeal of the step up in basis. I talked with Senator Mark Warner earlier this week, and he said, I'm kind of for a 28% capital gains rate. I think there's a number of moderate senators in the Democratic caucus that kind of are starting to say that. How do you think House Democrats are going to react to that? And also, we've also heard that going up to 39.6% on capital gains may not raise as much money as people think, unless you've got a backstop like repeal of step up in basis, because the Joint Tax Committee will assume that people won't sell. So tell us about capital gains and what you really think. What are the arguments you're hearing? Who's concerned, and where do you think it might land?
I mean, I think that's right, that 39.6 may not be the revenue maximizing rate. We're working with the Joint Committee on Taxation to understand, to some extent we are doing this as an offset. And so understanding how much it raises and how much political pain that creates is the mix that we go through to make decisions. I have not heard a member express comfort with any given rate, but I think you have seen the House be more aggressive in taxing capital gains over the past 15 years than you have in the Senate. Things like actively trying to close the carried interest loophole during the speaker's first turn at speakership, and then seeing it wiped out in the Senate, that there is some comfort with doing some changes to capital gains rate that we haven't seen in the Senate thus far.
Okay. If you raise the capital gains rate, are you going to do it retroactively, Catherine? Do you like that proposal from the Green Book?
I mean, I don't like to do anything retroactively because I think it harms taxpayers, with the caveat that abusive tax arrangements, maybe it's appropriate to do it retroactively. I think there's an open question to whether the issuance of an idea in a Green Book puts taxpayers on notice for change. And as a policy, I just don't love retroactive tax changes, but we'll have to see where the members are when we get to the date of enactment. And I'm not sure that retroactive is actually the most revenue maximizing rate anyway.
Okay, and you got a number of members who've written you and Chairman Neal about repeal of step up in basis. Some members in rural districts, some progressive Democrats otherwise who said, I don't think this is the best one. But you've got a narrow majority, but we're also going to be voting on a bill that has a lot of provisions. Can one proposal, like the opposition to one proposal by a chunk of 15 Democrats, effectively eliminate it from the bill, or how does that work?
I think it gives us pause, right? That's how we know when we're putting together a bill this big and this complicated, it puts a lot of pressure on the leadership and on the chairman to put together a bill that has 218 votes. And a bill like this is probably going to move really quickly. And so we're going to try to avoid any measures that lose votes. And this one is both one that I think most of the agriculture committee sent us a letter, which they don't normally weigh into tax issues. And so I also, I worry about just in general, some of the administrability of it. And so, we'll be careful. We'll talk to members. We'll understand their real feelings. Sometimes people send us letters to make a political point, but behind closed doors, they're in different places. And so we haven't had that family conversation, but we're well aware that we need to.
One final question. A lot of Democrats have been pushing for an increase in the SALT cap. What are you hearing? How many are you hearing from on that? Is it a significant issue? And isn't it really expensive? Wouldn't that mean you have to raise more taxes other places?
It is absolutely very expensive. But it also allows for progressive policies at the local level that are really important to our members from places like New Jersey, New York, California, Maryland, high cost, high tax states. And so I think it's pretty important to a pretty large chunk of our caucus that we do something on the SALT limitation. I don't know what that is yet. Certainly Mr. Swazi has made full repeal his call. But given the expense, I don't know what we're going to be able to do. And so we're working on it, but I think we have to do something on SALT, just given the makeup of our committee. And so we'll have to see what the ambition is for offsetting that, or thinking about what that looks like and things like that. But certainly our sophomore class, a lot of members from suburban districts who feel like part of why they're in Congress is because the repeal of, or the limitation on SALT indicated that members who previously represented the district were disconnected from their constituencies. And so, we have heard from them from the moment they got into office that this is really important to them. We had a vote last Congress pretty early, I think late 2019 on, a delay. And so I think there is still that desire in our caucus.
Great. Catherine, thank you very much for taking time with us today. We don't have any questions in the chat. Pat, you got one question before we let her go?
Well, you have one question in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, here it is. So for Catherine, I'm not sure I understand the question. If you could let Tony talk, Pat, we could do that.
No, unfortunately, it's a webinar. We can't, but I think I do, because Tony's a CPA, or he owns a CPA firm. So what he's saying is, Catherine, what do you need to understand about our type of taxpayer? I assume he means someone that's in the higher tax bracket.
That's a family business.
Yeah, or a family business, right? Someone that's going to retain a CPA. What do you need to understand about those kind of taxpayers that might inform how they make their decisions around tax modifications?
I think it's important to look at who works on Capitol Hill. the average, over 50% of the staff on Capitol Hill are under the age of 30, which tells me that they've barely paid their own taxes. They have not rarely worked in the private sector. And so understanding how business decisions get made, how choices are made, that tax is an expense like every other thing, is how I would start every meeting as you educate and lobby our members. Members are a little bit different. Obviously, a lot of them come from private sector, come from small businesses and things, but I think that's a pretty good place to start. And then thinking about the choices between, if you raise my taxes, this is what I won't do, whether it's invest in my business, hire more people, what pressures it places. Sometimes we do things that are more administrative challenges as opposed to, actual tax increases that are pretty painful for small businesses and family-owned businesses. And so I think it's just telling your experience and making it about the constituents and the jobs in the district is probably the best approach.
That's a great answer. Thanks so much for that. And thank you again for being on this call. You've imparted some really, really interesting bits of wisdom for us. So thank you for being on the call. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So now we're going to, Brandon has his video on, and I guess that means, Brandon, I guess you're going next instead of Russ, or how did you guys work this out? Brandon, we can't hear you. So I guess that means Russ is going next.
I had my phone on,
Okay.
which was my secondary, but I said I was going to for us to kind of lay the land, and then I will go into a couple specifics. But I know we've only got about 5 minutes. I could be, pretty brief on my pieces.
Okay.
All right, so Catherine covered a lot of this, gave some answers. I'm going to go through it quickly and do a little analysis on what she said. So congressional Democrats are going to try to increase the budget by about 3.5 trillion. The bulk of this money will be for spending, and I'm not going to go through all of those. It's for education, healthcare, childcare, that kind of thing. But they are considering some tax cuts. We talked about the SALT cap. And there are others for the families. You can see those listed. The revenue raisers are going to come, as you heard, principally from tax increases on individuals and corporations. My discussions with the committee staff, with both finance, ways and members, and some of the members themselves indicate they really think they can come up with maybe $1 trillion in increases on individuals and $1 trillion on corporations and multinational business. They're not sure where the rest is going to come from. So on the tax proposals for individuals and family businesses. So the proposal is to increase it to 39.6%. That is likely going to be what you see this fall in the reconciliation bill. We have found no Democrats who are opposed to raising the top rate back to 39.6%. Doesn't raise that much money because it was going to revert anyway. On capital gains, I threw out 28. Catherine said it's not going to be 39.6. She's looking for the revenue maximization number. We think joint tax will say that that's somewhere in the 28 to 30 range. I think you're going to expect to see something along those lines in the proposal, both by Ways and Means and Finance Committee. There's a proposal that hasn't had as much discussion in the media, and that's expanding the net investment income tax applications. There's proposals to expand who, basically anyone in a pass-through or self-employed sector will either have to pay the net investment income tax or SECA tax. That's the Biden proposal, and it would raise over $200 billion. There's problems with the SECA proposal. It's not clear that it can work under the specialized budget rules that they'll be passing the bill, but suffice to say that 3.8% tax is going to be applied to a broader number of people, we expect. And of course, that's sort of similar to capital gains. So you really want to add up your capital gains rate from whatever it's set to add the 3.8% to it. On Section 199, this is just a recent one proposal. Candidate Biden talked about phasing that out for people who earn more than $400,000. Biden did not include it in his budget, and we thought it might have died then, but Chairman Wyden, the Finance Committee, just this week introduced legislation to reform 199A. And he like Biden proposed, he phased out the deduction by 500,000 of income for all Americans. He did expand the base, and he expanded who gets it if you're under that $400,000 amount. He eliminated the wage investment limitations, expanded what qualifies as income, and made other changes. It's not clear whether they're actually going to pursue this. We'll just have to wait and see. And then SALT cap, we talked briefly about with Catherine. I will say I'm convinced that the most likely result here is that they will increase the cap. They may not double it to 20,000, but they also may eliminate the marriage penalty and allow married couples to have twice as high a cap. So you could see a scenario where maybe they raise it to 15, but a married couple would get 30,000. That's the kind of proposal I really expect to be included, not full repeal of the proposal. So there you go with the non-estate tax provision. Brandon, take it away.
Great, thanks, Russ. And so let me just share my screen briefly. Go through just a couple of the brief estate tax related issues that are being discussed.
Brandon, you need to get a little closer to the mic. You're hard to hear.
Okay, is that better, Pat?
Yes, it's much better.
Okay, perfect. So if I can just get over here to put my slides on. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but we talked about this during our last supporters meeting, but obviously everyone knows that the Biden tax plan includes a repeal of supplement basis, and we have been engaged on the Hill along with our membership in the Family Business Estate Tax Coalition, which again is the broader group that has other organizations with shared interests as ours, explaining the unintended consequences that would occur if such an exemption, if such a policy were to actually be repealed. Again, we're going to see more details here in the coming weeks about what that would look like if it's included. But I will say, again, I think that our efforts and those also that are working with us that would be impacted seem to be gaining traction. We reported the last time of a letter that was sent by 12 House Democrats that would oppose the inclusion of this provision in the bill. And there's also some senators that believe that are beginning to understand the importance of it, thanks to the work that Pat is leading on behalf of the PATG. But again, we'll kind of have to keep apprised of that. But I do think it seems like it's increasingly unlikely that we'll see a repeal of the step up included. But, again, as we've seen with discussion by Catherine and Russ about some of these other proposals, in terms of the lower corporate rate, the potential lower capital gains rate, that leaves revenue to be filled. So there are potential alternatives that they could look at to include to raise revenue. I think, the most one that's been discussed, and we'll have to see whether that actually is pursued, is an early sunsetting of the double estate tax exemption. There's also obviously on the Warren side of the progressives been a push for a wealth tax. I'd see that again as unlikely, but we're pursuing both of those in our meetings with members of the Hill. And in terms of the estate tax specifically, I will just highlight briefly the work that we're doing on the Estate Tax Rate Reduction Act. I think the last supporters meeting that we had, it was the bill was, I think, just about to be introduced. And since then, we've been working with Congressman Cuellar in his office to have meetings focused largely on Dems that we view as gettable to help kind of push back against the narrative of the increasing taxes and kind of different tax policy changes that have a negative impact on family-owned businesses, and the business owners and employees. And so, again, lots being discussed. Still, the devil is in the details. We'll see in probably the next 2 weeks a little bit more detail when the Senate pursues its budget resolution. But again, keeping an eye on all of these proposals. And again, thanks to Pat for her great leadership in leading that charge. It really is making a difference. And I'll just double down on what Frank said earlier and what Pat has said as well, is really the need to continue to engage. So we're doing that here in Washington on your behalf, but to the extent you can reach out to your lawmakers and really hammer home why these policies are bad policies, it can make a difference. So with that, Pat, I know again we're short on time, so I will turn it back to you.
Thanks, Brandon. And I would also emphasize, if you are meeting with legislators, if you've talked to them, whether it's a fundraiser or just casually run into them, please let us know, and we're happy to follow up with them. So once again, we appreciate everybody being on the call today. I'm sorry we've been over a little bit in terms of time. We really encourage you to support our work. We cannot do this without your support. And as you can appreciate, we have a lot of resources, and we're spending a lot of those on all of these efforts. We have expanded our focus of policy and taxation group. So we are working on all of these issues that are so important to family businesses. So please go online, become a supporter, become a member, Policy and Taxation Group or Family Enterprise USA. So once again, appreciate your time on the call today. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.